Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of LA Legal. I'm Liana. We have Nima, and today we are joined by Amy. Please introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Yes. Well, first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much, both of you guys, for having me here today. I'm super excited to be here, and I love what you guys do with social media and incorporating it into your law firm and just practice. So I think it's awesome, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, super excited to have Amy. Just took the bar. She's gonna pass. She's doing some work comp defense, but has some criminal defense experience.
Yes.
So just starting her legal journey, and I'm excited to be talking about the case.
YNW Melly.
Correct.
Okay, we're just
Yes.
going to call him Melly because it's a mouthful. But quick intro about Melly. Born James Maurice Damons, was a Florida native who released a mixtape titled I Am You in August of 2018, which became his label debut. The lead single, Murder on My Mind, ironic, went platinum 6 times over. He dropped a short 21-minute documentary about his life mid-October of that same year. 4 days later, on October 26th, two of the men depicted in the film as his closest companions were killed in an apparent drive-by shooting, with Melly and another man present. In February of 2019, the state of Florida charged him and the companion with 2 counts each of first-degree murder, and 4.5 years later, and a mistrial later, Melly is still in county jail waiting to be tried a second time. So this is like totally up your alley, Nima Ramani. So let's talk about what they're being accused of. First-degree murder, talk about that a little bit, and then we'll dive into the trial.
Yeah, so obviously premeditation. So a few things to talk about. Florida is a death penalty case, and what was really interesting about this case for the legal nerds, one is this was one of the first cases, the other, of course, being Young Thug and YSL, where rap lyrics were used against the criminal defendant.
Right.
A lot of people don't like that. There's First Amendment issues. There's rules of evidence issues. We're going to get into all that. But this case was also unique in that this was the first case after Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland school shooter. He pled guilty to many counts of murder, and that case just went to the penalty phase, and the jurors had to decide whether or not they were going to impose the death penalty. And I think there were 2 jurors, I believe, 2 or 3, who decided not to impose the death penalty, and Nicholas Cruz's life was saved. So Ron DeSantis and the Florida State Legislature, they changed the law to say in a death penalty case, you only need 9 out of 12 jurors to return a death sentence. So prosecutors were seeking the death sentence in this case, death penalty in this case. And really, it was a big appellate issue, and it was going to go, I'm sure, all the way to the Supreme Court. If he were actually convicted, do you need a unanimous jury verdict to put someone to death? And Florida was one of the few states that didn't. So anyway, for everyone that's watching, case hung, so we didn't even get that far, but that was one of the big issues in the
Right.
case.
So I'm actually glad you brought up the lyrics, because that was one of the main, well, not main, but one of the first points I wanted to talk to you guys about. Because what are your thoughts on that, right? Florida does not have a law that decriminalizes artistic expression, right? And so that's something that prosecution wants to bring in the second trial.
Right.
And so what are your thoughts on that?
So I can jump in. So, I mean, coming from someone who's a music head, I love music, and I think it should be really on a case by case basis. You have people or artists specifically, that are genuine artists that truly express themselves. And then you have people or artists that they do implement their expression to lead to some sort of crime. Like, there have been cases where they do what they end up doing what they said happened in the crime. And then it's usually correct. So it's like, I think it should be a case by case based situation. But I do know with California, recently in 2022, we have the Assembly Bill 2799 that recently passed, that actually puts a little restriction as far as introducing evidence into court, and essentially that it could be offered as long as its probative value is not substantially outweighed by undue prejudice. So I know we have those restrictions going on.
Yeah, I think California and New York passed a similar law, and I don't want to give Amy bar exam PTSD, but you're really dealing with 2 issues. Obviously, people that are watching this say, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
That's free speech, right? You can't prosecute someone for what they say. Well, it's
Yeah.
not exactly that issue. They're not being prosecuted for the rap lyrics or anything they're saying.
Right.
It's really a rule of evidence. And for any law student, you take evidence, they say, well, anything you say can be used against you, right? An admission. So Amy was talking about it. Sometimes in these cases, some very specific part of the song directly addresses the crime, right? So I think in the YSL case, like they were rapping about the car they rented that was used in one of the murders. And in this case, similarly, it was, Melly's own words in the song. There was a documentary as well. So they want to use the words against him and not prosecute him for it. And some of these laws that have changed saying, well, look, if you want to use something that may be artistic, a judge needs to make a very specific finding before that's allowed.
Right. So I actually have the lyrics in part that would potentially be introduced. They read, "I didn't even mean to shoot him. He just caught me by surprise. I reloaded my pistol, cocked it back, and shot him twice. His body dropped to the floor, and he had teardrops in his eyes," right? So these are actually lyrics that he wrote while he was serving a sentence for another crime when he was 16 years old. And so this, in conjunction with that documentary, that 20-minute documentary, is the issue here, which is why they actually pushed the new trial back. It was supposed to begin, February 5th, I think, or March, beginning of March. So they pushed it because that's what the judge has to make a ruling on.
Yeah, so because he's in custody, he hasn't waived his right to a speedy trial. He wants to get to trial as quickly as possible because obviously if you're out, you're on bond, maybe you're less interested in having a trial right away. But when you're in custody, you were like, well, let me see if I can push the case forward. Maybe I can get out if I'm acquitted.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the cell phone evidence. And we talk about this almost every podcast because, we live in 2024 and everybody has cell phones. And so they use the cell phone evidence to place him at the scene of the crime. And so what do you think about that? Because there was a big dispute about whether or not the cell phone evidence was accurate, right? Whether the grids actually pinpointed him in that spot or within a certain amount of feet within it. So what do you guys think?
Listen, I really like cell site evidence as a former prosecutor. Literally, it can put you within specific feet of where you are. Now, obviously, there's some defense attorneys and experts that dispute that. But the triangulation, in my opinion, is pretty accurate. And of course, in this case, the defense was, well, we weren't there and this was a drive-by, right? But if your cell phone is there, you might have a difficult time explaining away that. And then there was some testimony that maybe Melly wasn't there, but he left his phone with a friend. So
it was like a shared cell phone, right?
Right.
And so a big part of the defense to prove that it was a shared cell phone was that his mom was texting him on it while he was already in custody. And so they were trying to prove that this is a shared cell phone. The mom didn't even know that, So I don't know if I buy that. I'm with you. Like, I feel like cell phone, the towers can now pinpoint people within a very close radius. So I'm with you. I do think it's reliable.
Absolutely. And just to jump in, then yes, when you have a case against you, people need to understand that cell phones can be really a critical key component to, pin people as to where they are. Text messages, it's I think, sufficient evidence for sure.
Yeah, and Amy talks about it, right? There's the cell phone evidence. There's video of them together, right? Leaving the studio at like an early hour, if I recall correctly. I covered this case for a long crime. And I think Court TV as well. And then there's a text message, right, where he's like, "Listen, I did it. Shh,
I did it."
So I mean, that's pretty damning in my opinion. Some people sometimes brag about things that they don't do, but I thought it was a pretty strong case for the prosecution.
Right. And I would just, add too, kind of coming from the defense standpoint, I know they really emphasize the fact with like motive. What would be the reason for him to do this? And, you mentioned earlier like YNW. So each of the 4 individuals that were involved with this whole situation, they all have the crew name YNW before their name, which means Young New Wave. And it's just, they're essentially their childhood friends. They grew up together. So, they were upcoming rappers together. So it's like, why would Melly do this? And then but definitely, yes, I do recognize that the prosecution does have sufficient evidence. There's a ballistic test that's shown that the shooting was done within the car versus outside being staged. So it's a lot for sure against him.
Well, it was staged because not only did the shots that killed the 2 come from within the vehicle, then there were shots that they were able to prove that in order for them to stage it, they
Right.
shot the vehicle from the outside.
Right.
But I think that's an important point, right? Motive isn't an element of the crime. The prosecution doesn't have to prove it. But look, jurors are ordinary people. They're going to want to know, like, why would someone kill their friends? And
Right.
I think they didn't have a good story to explain that. In my opinion, I think that was one of the holes in the prosecution's case.
Right. Right.
Do you guys think that they didn't do a good job picking a jury either? Because it
Oh.
seems like the hung jury was because of that one juror. Did you guys? Did you
Yeah.
guys
One juror ended up convincing two others.
Right. Well, it
You know,
sounded
self-juror,
like
holdout
he or
juror.
she was like unhinged, right? They had a bunch of it. Did you guys read this interview?
Yeah, I mean, I read that there were some allegations of homophobia, and look, you never know what goes on in that jury deliberation room. I always say it's 12
Yeah.
strangers who can't get out of jury duty. It's like a real life, real world, know.
Right.
So
Right.
there's drama back there, but that's not something that I typically hear.
So let me ask you guys this. So, new trial is coming up at some point, right? They have to pick a whole new jury. At this point, you've either watched the original trial, you've read about it.
Yeah.
How are they going to go about, do you think, picking 12 new people who are going to be completely unbiased or unfazed by what they've read, seen, or heard?
I know that's a tough question. I mean, and given the fact that Melly is a very big artist, especially like in the Black community, very popular, and it's a very high profile case right now. So I don't know, how do you keep away bias from jury?
Yeah, look, I mean, you got a lot of things on. You have obviously like a racial component, right? You have a black male defendant. There's some allegations of, which is not typical, right? That law enforcement did things that were improper. Prosecutors did things that were improper. Look, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Go after law enforcement. So I get it. And then on top of that, you have layered the celebrity factor, right?
Right.
Jurors love celebrities. We talk about them all the time, right? I'm sure when we cover the Baldwin trial, and one thing I've always said is, doesn't matter what race you are, if you're a celebrity, you have a much greater chance of getting acquitted. And I think that's something that's possible in this case. And look, you have all sorts of crazy jurors too. Imagine how frustrating to sit as a juror for weeks, right? This wasn't a short trial. You go in that deliberation room.
I think
you
it was
have
like
someone
19 days,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You have someone that you can't convince, and you got to start the process all over.
Right.
I think it's frustrating for all parties involved. But Nima, talk to our viewers about what a mistrial is. Let's go over the two other times the defense filed a motion for it. It was denied, and then we'll kind of wrap this up.
Yeah. So there's a few bases for mistrial. One is if there's a legal error, right? So the defense makes their motion. Usually the motion's denied, but you have to do that as a defense attorney to preserve the record on appeal. Usually, if you don't object, sometimes there's a plain error doctrine, but again, I know the lawyers will be like, in the YouTube comments, like, what do you mean? Normally, you gotta object, raise your mistrial motion to preserve the record. Then you can appeal, right? And we know that obviously one of the bases for appeal was that death penalty statute that we talked about. But there's also a second type of mistrial where if there's not a unanimous jury verdict in a criminal case, that's grounds for mistrial. So normally what happens is the jurors start deliberating, they can't reach a verdict. And it seems like, by the way, the verdict wasn't even on murder. It was on manslaughter, which is a lesser included charge. So we can talk about that as well. But the jurors can't reach a verdict. They tell the judge, they write a note to the clerk or the bailiff, and they say, we can't reach a verdict. And the judge reads them a special instruction. It's called an Allen charge, where the judge tells them, go back,
Try to
it
figure this
again.
out.
And then when they come back again, then the judge has no choice. They say they're hopelessly deadlocked. They use that magic language. Then we got to start the whole process all over, which is
Right.
what a mistrial is.
Right. So, and then this time around, they're trying to get the prosecutor off the case. There's a whole lot of things that are happening here that are pushing this trial further and further out, because it was supposed to be in January, then it got pushed to February 5th, and then jury selection was supposed to start March 5th, which was 3 days ago. Oh, this might air at a different time, so March 5th. And so now it's pushed out, waiting for the judge to make a ruling on the video. So the first time defense files a mistrial was in June of 2023, and that was over evidence presented by Melly's ex-girlfriend's mom, right, on hearsay grounds. And so the defense, the motion was that it created a prejudicial fiasco because of all of the sidebars, and so the jury was privy to all of the back and forth fighting between defense and prosecution, and so the judge said, nope, we're still moving forward. And then the second time, it was right as the prosecution prepared to rest their case, and that was also denied. So the third time was definitely a charm.
There you go. Listen, no one likes to start over, especially the judge and the prosecutor. They want to move their cases along, but the jurors can't reach a verdict. Then, yeah, no choice. We have a jury system. So.
Well, it sounded like they had a diehard fan of YNW Melly on that jury. I keep wanting to call him like
I know it's kind of tricky.
BMW Melly,
I know.
but YNW Melly. But any final thoughts as we wrap up and look forward to this crazy trial?
I mean, we just have to wait and see what happens with this. But I think it's a really interesting case, like Nima raised earlier with the issue of just rap lyrics being introduced into court. This has been an ongoing issue. It raises issues with even death penalty. It raises issues, with gun violence in the Black community, and it's a lot going on here. So it's definitely an interesting case to follow and keep going. Just keep watching.
No, I agree. Obviously, each case is unique, but you got the controversy here because you have obviously the death penalty. The studies show that disproportionately Black men are subject to the death penalty, right? And now you have cases where you have arguably artists,
right,
who are being prosecuted as street gangs, right? So that's what the argument is from the prosecution perspective. You're seeing Rico, and again, not in this case necessarily, but I can't help but think of, Young Thug or even R. Kelly, right? And R. Kelly, a very different story, right? He was convicted in many different jurisdictions, but you have groups of individuals who are being prosecuted as a criminal enterprise when historically, right, that was used for the mob or other types of street gangs or the cartel. So a lot of controversy here, but it's something that I see as a new trend in prosecution and as well as criminal defense, and we're going to see. It's going to be interesting to see if it continues.
So you can find me on my Instagram. It's my first and last name, Amye, AMYE, period, last name, OSAKUE.
Thank you so much for joining us, Amy, and for all of you, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.